You guys may be seated.
That little bumper video, as they're called, is going to apply kind of to the end of our sermon. And I needed something there so I didn't awkwardly have to unplug everything and get over here and have you all laugh at me or something. So, but we're going to be in the same story. We're going to be looking at Nehemiah. We're in the same series that we walk by faith. So if you have a Bible, go ahead and open to Nehemiah chapter 2. If not, don't worry, it will be on the screen. But I'm going to start with, I'm going to call it a flyover recap. Basically to kind of catch you up to speed on how we got to Nehemiah chapter 1, verse 1 to where we're at today. And just a plug, by the way, if you've missed any of the sermons, any of the series, and you want to go check them out, if you go to our website, bridgewayamelia.church, up on the top right, there is a link that says Watch a Sermon, and it'll pop up all of these. They're all on there, so you can watch and catch up on any of them if you feel the need to. And so let's do a quick flyover of where we're at. So Nehemiah is hundreds of miles away from Jerusalem. He is the king's cupbearer, and we kind of explored what that means in previous sermons. And he had somebody come and visit him, and the Bible calls him a brother. So a man comes, and he visits Nehemiah, and he tells Nehemiah all about Jerusalem. So Nehemiah's like, oh, how's the old city? How is it? He tells him the walls are completely torn down. The city is in shambles. The Jews that live around there are wrecked. They're not serving God. And so Nehemiah just has this immediate burden of wanting to go and fight for his people. He's never been to Jerusalem, but he wants to go. He wants to do something. He's not sure exactly what he's going to be doing, but he's like, man, if I can go, I can help rebuild that wall. That will change everything. So he goes to God in prayer. He has this incredible burden. He goes to God in prayer, and then he approaches the king. If you guys remember the story, he's kind of close with the king, just with his position. The king realizes something is off. It's like, Nehemiah, you're usually so happy-go-lucky, smiling. What's wrong? Something's up. And so Nehemiah kind of tells him his heart, kind of spills his guts to him. And the king miraculously says, look, you can go, take the time you need, go to the city. Here's some money, here's some materials, here's some letters that help you get there and to go through and travel through these provinces and see the governors. This is safe passage for you to go. And so at the point we left the story last week, Nehemiah is in Jerusalem now, and he's sort of assessing the situation. He's sort of looking at the wall and he's like, oh, what do I get into? I don't know how to rebuild this. I don't know how to rebuild a wall anyway. And so he's kind of assessing the situation, and he's also rounding up some troops, so to speak. He is sharing his burden with the Jews in that area and saying, look, we've got to rebuild this. Let's spend some time in prayer together, and let's do something. And so really, even though that was kind of a condensed version of chapter 1 and most of chapter 2, I just kept having these 3 words come back to me as I read this over. And those 3 words were this: burden, prayer, action. Burden, prayer, action. So Nehemiah had this great burden to come back and to help rebuild this city. He spent time in prayer, and then he went and actually did something. And because of these 3 steps, Nehemiah finds himself now in Jerusalem. And so I kind of liken this to, you guys know probably somebody in your life like this. I call them a dreamer. There's somebody that, man, they have big dreams. And like, I'm going to do this for God. I want to do that. Or I've got this dream for my life, and yet nothing ever comes to fruition. They're kind of content to just sit on the couch. And I see some of y'all shaking heads. Content to sit on the couch and not put action to it. So these words I'm talking about, burden, prayer, action, they really got to go hand in hand. You can have a burden all day long. You can even pray about it, but if you sit on your couch and do nothing about it, you're not going to accomplish very much. And so Nehemiah didn't sit back. He took action. And here's the one thing I want you guys to catch, is that the passages never explain Nehemiah praying to God and then God laying out a plan. God didn't say, hey, Nehemiah, you're going to wake up at 4 tomorrow morning, you're going to go to the king, act a little bit off, and the king will talk to you, and then you're going to, the king's going to give you money. That plan was not set forth in front of Nehemiah. Nehemiah had to take a little bit of action himself. He didn't plan that word for word. I kind of liken this to an analogy. I used this once a long time ago, so I apologize if you heard it. I used it once with the teens, and they had no idea what I was talking about. I'm going to use it with you guys, because you guys will know. By show of hands, how many of you have ever driven a car that did not have power steering? Right, so a lot of you guys, your first cars. Does anybody still have a car that doesn't have power steering? All right, so I don't know when it came standard. Sometime in the 80s probably came standard and everything. So if you drive a classic car, even my hunk of junk 1990 Chevy truck has power steering. And so here's the analogy. For you guys that no one talked about with no power steering, if you were in a driveway or a parking lot and your foot is on the brake, right? You're not moving at all. How hard was that wheel to turn? I mean, you had to wrench on it to get it to turn. My first car, one of my first cars was a 1979 GMC truck. It didn't have power steering, and I think the bigger the tires, the harder it is. So it's hard to turn. You could do it, but you had to put some effort into it. And so the trick was, if you needed to turn in a tight spot or a parking lot, if you just got the car rolling a little bit, it became much easier to steer. Now, it still wasn't easy. It still was kind of hard at real slow speeds, but it became much easier than if you were stationary. And then if you got up to highway speeds or whatever, it just, you didn't notice a difference. It was just like a modern car. But I'm glad a lot of you raised your hands. So that analogy went over. So I think that we can put this to the story of Nehemiah and probably our lives too. So many times, just being in church and being around youth a lot, we hear like, I don't know what God's will is for my life. I just really wish He would tell me what He wants me to do because I would do it. Right? And so they sit back and they do nothing. It's like, God's going to tell me any day now, He's going to open up a door and I'm going to do something. It's going to be great for God. But you're just sitting there doing nothing. I think that God rewards action. Right? So kind of like that car that's much easier to steer when it's moving. Same thing. If you just get out there and serve, you may not know God's specific will for your life. But I can tell you this. He's commanded everyone here to go and make disciples. Baptize and make disciples of all nations. We know that. All right? So if you just steer in that direction and go do something, I think that God rewards that. It's sort of a faithfulness step on your end. And I think God can direct you in a much better way. So we see that right here, right? And so we also see that action brought Nehemiah to Jerusalem, but it also brought adversity. And we're going to look at that specifically today. It brought adversity. And I think that that's the action part of it. If somebody has big dreams and I want to start an orphanage for kids and God's going to do this and do that, and they sit there and do nothing, I don't think they're ever going to face adversity because they're not doing anything. The enemy's doesn't care. You're not doing anything. With action, I think, comes that adversity step here. So, and I titled my sermon, Action in the Face of Adversity. So if you guys are note takers, I like taking notes. I'm going to have a couple things for you guys to take notes on. It's called Action in the Face of Adversity. And before we start looking at what adversity looked like for Nehemiah, I think we've got to intro the characters, so to speak. We've already met Nehemiah, talked about the king. We know God's in this story. And actually last week when Brent was preaching through chapter 2, we met two of I'm going to call them the baddies, the bad guys. We met two of them. There's three. So I'm just going to jump back to verse 10, chapter 2, verse 10, and we will see at least the first two guys. And again, we heard about these guys last week. When Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah, the Ammonite, official heard of it, they were deeply disturbed that a man had come to seek the well-being of the children of Israel. So there's our two, Sanballat and Tobiah. These guys were leaders of some kind. All right, so they had influence. They were most likely governors of a territory. Jerusalem wasn't their territory, but they were in that outlying area. So these were men of importance, and they had some influence, and they had some followers and some people to pull from, right? And so I've got 4 points for you today. So point number one is the power struggle. We're going to look at the power struggle. Power struggle is real. That's what I called it. And so we're going to pick up exactly where we left off last week and to jump down to verse 19, and we'll pick it up there. It says, but when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab, that's a third and final piece to this puzzle, Geshem the Arab, heard of it, they laughed at us and despised us and said, what is this thing that you are doing? Will you rebel against the king? So I answered them, this is Nehemiah, and said to them, the God of heaven himself will prosper us, therefore we his servants will arise and build, but you have no heritage or right or memorial in Jerusalem. So now we got our three main bad guys, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. Now throughout the sermon, I may call them the adversaries. That's a lot easier to say than Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. And so what they're doing here is this is sort of a veiled attempt right here. So they come before the people. So Nehemiah is there, and then he's got his crowd of people that he's trying to convince to work with him on this wall. And they come up and they kind of say, like, what are you doing? We're laughing at them. They're kind of mocking them. And they throw out this line here. Will you rebel against the king? Now, if you remember from the story, Nehemiah has the blessing of the king. In fact, he even had letters to bring. So these guys, if they are in fact governors, then Nehemiah would have brought those letters, and they would have already known that Nehemiah is there to do, and the king's okay with it, basically. So I think that they're talking and trying to veil this and trying to scare the other workers from joining this work party. I think they're saying, hey man, if you do this, the king's not going to be very happy. And in these days, when the king wasn't happy, that usually meant your head rolled or something. It was usually death, right? So that was a very scary thing. So I think they're trying to intimidate them here. And so my first question is, why do these guys even care? Why are they so mad? Jerusalem isn't their territory. I mean, we're talking about a very small group of Jews at this point, and we're talking about a city that is in complete ruin, in shambles. So why do these guys even care if a small group was coming and try and rebuild the wall? And so for that, we got to look at a little bit of history. These people groups have a history together. And I'm bringing it all the way back to Exodus here, right? So I'm just going to recap Exodus. Exodus, they're in Egypt, the Israelites from Egypt. Moses leads them out of Egypt. If you guys remember from Sunday school, the parting of the Red Sea, the Israelites go through it, the Egyptians are in there, the Red Sea closes, and then they wander around the wilderness and they come to the promised land, right? So that's where we're at right now. They come to the promised land and they send in spies to spy out the land. Does anybody remember how many spies went in? 12 spies went in, right? And so they're in there for a couple of days. They come back. 10 of those 12 is like, no, we can't go in there. There's giants in there. They got great armies. The cities are like, they got huge walls. We just can't do it. And then there's 2 that said, yeah, that's all true, but God said that he gave it to us and he'll be with us. So let's go. God said he'd be with us, right? So, and because of those 10 that said we can't do it, and a lot of the followers said, no, we can't do it, God punished them. They had to wander the wilderness for 40 years out there. So the whole generation died. So none of them that said you couldn't go see, we couldn't get in there, none of them got to see the promised land. And then it became time where they could go in. So in the promised land, there were great cities. There were great walled cities. But God was with them, just like he said he was 40 years ago. They went in and they conquered all of these villages, towns, cities, and they cleared the promised land. Well, 2 of those groups that got cleared out of there were the Horonite and the Ammonites, the exact 2 people groups that 2 of our bad guys are from. And no doubt there was some oral or written history to look back on when the Ammonites said, hey, remember we used to live in there, we lived in peace and harmony, we loved it, and then this crazy group came in and said their God needed the land, and we got kicked out of our own land. That's probably the history that was passed down. I know if we as Americans got kicked out of America, I'm sure that we'd have that in our history books. right? So these guys were a little bit mad about that. And then so we got the third guy, Geshem. He has really no skin in this game. He is, if you look at history, he's regarded as probably being the head of the Arabs, the entire king or whatever they would have been called. He was the head of these guys. Their territory came pretty close to Jerusalem. But if you remember from history, and especially Pastor Duke always says this, the Arabs are forever the thorn in the side of the Jews. And so I think that this guy Geshem is just there to pile on, have some fun, kill some Jews, whatever. I think that's his point of being there. He didn't really have any skin in this game, right? So I think this rebuilding of the wall that we have, even though it's a fairly insignificant event by a small group of Jews, it's a symbolic restoration of the Jews. The Jews were held captive. They were taken away from Jerusalem, most of them. So their homeland, that's why it got destroyed in the first place. So I think this is a symbolic rebuilding of the Jews in the area, and that really made these guys pretty mad. And it was also a setting up of the ways and the law of God back up in the area. Really, they haven't had that since the Jews were captured hundreds of years ago. And so Nehemiah is seeking good. He's listening to God. He's doing what God is telling him to do. And then these other guys, the adversaries, as I'll call them, they are seeking their own advantage. And really, I think that advantage is this. I think they're trying to restore the pride of their people. They were kicked out by this group hundreds of years ago. Now it's their turn to squelch this before it even starts. It's kind of easy pickings. Again, we're talking about a small group. Easy pickings. And I think that's what they're trying to do right here. And I want you to notice Nehemiah's response. We just read it. Nehemiah says this. He says, God will prosper us and we will build. He's very matter of fact about it. It's pretty, you don't have to guess what he's talking about here. So he's really saying, we don't care what you have to say. We've got a job to do. We're going to build this wall. And so that ends chapter 2. And chapter 3 begins, and I encourage you guys to read chapter 3 this week. We're going to kind of paraphrase it, and I'll tell you why. And we're going to spend most of our time in chapter 4 today. Chapter 3 is really just a listing of names. So, it says this guy and his family, that from this area, they're working on the wall in this spot. And this guy and his family, they're working on this gate in the wall. And this guy and his family, they're working here. So it just lists down all the people who are working on the wall and where they're working at. So there's not a whole lot to maybe preach from, but I encourage you guys to read it anyway. But two things I want you guys to get out of it, even though we're not preaching from it, two things. His work has started. End of chapter 2, he says, God's with us, we will build. Work hasn't started yet. Chapter 3, work has started. They're starting to rebuild this wall. Second thing I want you to notice is that it shows the response of the people to Nehemiah's call to action. Nehemiah comes out here. He has no idea what he's doing, honestly, and he needs to rally people to help him. So he has explained to them, this is my burden, right? So this is our ancestral home. Our people are in disarray. We need this. He shares that burden with them. They buy in. They say, you know what? Yeah, I see your point. Completely true. They spend some time in prayer together. And then finally, now in chapter 3, we're seeing that they take that call to action. And they're doing something about it. They're actually working on the wall. So I want you guys to catch that. Point number 2 is we're going to see a verbal threat in point 2 here. And again, in chapter 4 is where we're going to spend most of our time. So let's head over there right now. And here we saw a brewing power struggle start at the end of chapter 2 there. Here we're going to see this power struggle move towards its first step of violence. Really is what we're going to see. So let's start right there with verse 1. But it so happened when Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall that he was furious and very indignant and mocked the Jews. And he spoke before his brethren and the army of Samaria and said, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they fortify themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they complete it in a day? Will they revive the stones from the heaps of rubbish, stones that are burned? Now Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him. And he says, whatever they build, even if a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. And so now the laughter and the mocking at the Jews' expense continues. They're still laughing about it. They're still mocking them. But here, they're not only mocking the Jews, they're starting to mock God himself. They're starting to say, what are they going to build it in one day? Is there God going to show up and do a miracle here? Or, are they going to take these stones that are crumbled and put them back together? Is God going to do that? And so they also don't think the Jews have a shot at doing this. And we see that from Tobiah's comment. He says, even if they build it, a fox can jump on that sucker, it'll come down. They don't have much faith that the Jews can actually do this. And here's the important thing. I don't know what I'm doing to do that, but I got to stand still. Here's the important thing. they don't realize and they don't take into account that God's on their side. Right? So they're just looking at just the Jews in small number and they can't do this. They're forgetting that God's on their side here. And so here is where we see a different kind of response from Nehemiah. And this will mirror what he's done in the past and what he does throughout the future as well. Starting in verse 4, he says, "Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn their reproach on their own heads and give them as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their iniquity and do not let their sin be blotted out from before you. For they have provoked you to anger before the builders." So we built the wall, and the entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. So Nehemiah goes straight to God. If you remember last time, in chapter 2, Nehemiah addressed the group, the bad guys. He addressed them specifically, right to them. And I think he didn't have any more to say. Remember, he said, God will prosper us. We're going to build the wall. And that hasn't changed. I don't think he needs to address them anymore. That's still the same. He would say the same thing again. Here he takes it to God. And he's saying, God, I'm following your will. You led me here. You directed me here. You helped me gather these people. We're doing this work, and you have ordained it. Look, here's the problem I'm having. I'm giving it to you. This is your problem to deal with. And some people look at his prayer, and they're like, man, that's kind of harsh. Like, he's praying for them to fall. He's praying for them to be held captive. All right? He's praying some pretty harsh stuff towards these other group of people. And there's nothing wrong with a prayer like this. In fact, the Bible's filled with them. David, he prayed lots of prayers like that. David, for much of his life, was chased around by enemies. And so he prayed prayers very similar to this. And I think on maybe our level, on society level, if you had a friend who was a close friend and they just messed up their life somehow, maybe just drugs, just to use that as an example. They've really messed up their life. They keep making horrible decisions. There may come a point when your wish is, I just wish something would wake them up. I just wish maybe they got put in jail. I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff out here. Maybe there's something that you don't really wish for them, but you're to a point where you're like, there needs to be justice, and maybe that is the wake-up call that they need. That's what this prayer is. This prayer isn't to harm them. This prayer is to, look, they're evil, they're coming against you, God. Deal with this. Maybe it is justice that is the catalyst to bring about salvation. Let me just think about it for a second. If Nehemiah didn't pray this, they remained in their evil ways. Well, what's their hope for salvation? So Nehemiah is saying, look, maybe justice will bring salvation. And that's what his prayer is about. And then after prayer comes the action. Remember, burden, prayer, action. We see that in verse 6. So we built the wall, and the entire wall was joined together up to half its height. For the people had a mind to work. This shows us that even though there was a verbal threat of violence, it did not stop God's people. Nehemiah didn't slow the plan down. He said, let's go. We got work to do. Don't matter what they're saying. Let's get it done. And I remember what he said at the end of chapter 2. Again, I keep coming back to it. God will prosper us. We will build. That's his plan. He just keeps going right there. So it's burden, prayer, action. Point number 3, we see it escalate a little bit. Now we have a physical threat. Point 3, physical threat. And honestly, we're really looking at the steps of bullying right here in the Bible, right in front of us. The teens did a whole series on bullying a few years ago, and we looked at different guys in the Bible, and one of my lessons was on these guys here. So really, we've got these guys starting with, they're trying to intimidate. That's step number 1. They're trying to intimidate. It's veiled, but the intimidation is there. That fails. And then they took to laughing and mocking the Jews. Verbal bullying is what it is. That failed. And now they talk and they plot about physical violence against the Jews. And that's where we're at right now. How many of you guys remember Mike Tyson? You guys remember him? Yeah. It's a household name, at least when I grew up it was. I wasn't a big fan of boxing, but there he is. Yeah, there he is on the right. So that's him. So in my era, all right, so from like mid-80s to mid-90s, he was one of the best boxers that was around at the time. He is I think he still holds this, he was the youngest person ever to win the outright undisputed heavyweight championship at the age of 20. It's a pretty good feat. Unfortunately, later events in his career kind of overshadowed what a great boxer he was. You guys remember the bout with Holyfield when he bit his ears? You guys remember that? That was like the butt of all the Saturday Night Live jokes for a long time. And then he retires and he comes out and he's got this huge like tribal face tattoo. That you got to have some dedication to do a face tattoo. I'm not against tattoos, but boy, right there, that's out for everybody to see. And so those events kind of overshadow most of his career. He really was a great boxer, but when you ask about him, that's what most people remember, this thing. Anyway, he has a quote, and it's a great quote. He uses it lots of times, and it's so simple, and yet it's a very wise quote and can be translated to many areas. He's obviously talking about boxing, and he says this. He says, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. Everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. And right now, we're sort of seeing a symbolic punch in the face in Nehemiah's life. And so we're going to see when adversity comes, what's he going to do? All right, so in that quote, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. What happens or the important part is, what do you do after adversity comes? Do you stick with your plan, or do you say, that's too hard, I'm going to do something else? All right, so we're going to see this happen to Nehemiah. We're going to pick it up in verse 7 here. It says, now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were being restored and the gaps were beginning to be closed, that they became very angry, and all of them conspired together to come and attack Jerusalem and create confusion. These dudes are furious because none of their plans have worked. They were expecting the Jews to roll over and quit day one. And their multiple attempts haven't got them there. So they're pretty mad. They're mad enough that they're bringing in more allies. You know, as that verse talks about a whole other people group we haven't mentioned yet. They're bringing in more people to their cause, to the hating of the Israelites. They're also mad enough that now they're willing to say, let's take care of this in a physical manner. Let's physically attack them somehow. And so here's Nehemiah's response. Again, it just sounds very familiar. At this point, verse 9 is his response. He says, nevertheless, we made our prayer to God, and because of them, we set a watch against them day and night. That's his prayer and his action right there. He prayed again to God, and he says right here, because of them, we set a watch. Really smart enough to put some watch out there for them. But they continued, all right? And nothing has fazed them. And we don't know what this prayer looks like. It just says we made our prayer to God. And I'm sure they brought concerns. And honestly, they probably brought fears before God. I mean, this is a lot of people now wanting to do physical violence against them. And I kind of imagine that it would sound something like this. Here's a prayer from Psalm chapter 5, verse 10. It says, punish them, God. Let them fall by their own schemes. Drive them out because of their many crimes, for they rebel against you. I can see Nehemiah saying something very similar. You know, God, this is your work. These guys want to destroy it. You know, I put these guys in your hands. Again, we see prayer, and then we see action. He continued to work. He set up a guard. All right? Continue with action. And finally, with the fourth point, we're going to see plans foiled. I'm going to read a good chunk right here. Starting in verse 10. Then Judah said, the strength of the laborers is failing, and there is so much rubbish that we are not able to build the wall. And their adversaries said, they will neither know nor see anything till we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease. So it was, when the Jews who dwelt near them came, that they told us 10 times, from whatever place you turn, they will be upon us. Therefore I positioned men behind the lower parts of the wall, at the openings, and I set the people according to their families, with their swords, their spears, their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles, to the leaders, and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. And it happened when our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had brought their plot to nothing, that all of us returned to the wall, everyone to his work. So here we see the situation from the outside seems to get a little bit worse. And we see that right in verse 11. It says, verse 10. Where's 11? Yeah, 11, 10. That Judah is now saying that they've lost faith. They're saying, we can't build this. So let me tell you who this is real quick. So when Nehemiah comes to town, he shares his burden, and people take up the cause with him. Not everybody did. Okay, so there's still Jews living in the outside area that said, you know what, man, hey, have at it, do your thing. I'm pretty comfortable right here. You know, I don't have any vacation time at work. Can't help you out. I don't want to commit. You know, I don't want to give you any money for this. You know, I'm cool. Leave me alone. So there are Jews living in that outside area, and this is who he's talking about. So this is Judah that he's talking about. So they are saying, hey, we're losing faith. I just don't think they can do it. And then in verse 11, we talk about a more specific plot. All right, so we've already got the threat of physical violence. Now it says that they want to come in silently and kill them. Now we have death threats. This is kind of up the ante a little bit. And so this has such an effect to that outside group of Jews. A lot of people call them the faithless Jews because they did not see the burden or didn't want to do anything. It has such effect on these Jews that these Jews come into town. They say, Nehemiah, look, these guys are wanting to kill you. You need to abandon this. You need to flee the city. And I kind of think it's more of a self-preservation move. I kind of think that if these guys were to attack, and let's say they did kill Nehemiah and the whole group, I think they would say, a Jew's a Jew. I don't care if he worked on the wall at all. I'm probably going to kill him too. I think it's more of a self-preservation thing is why they're coming and pleading with Nehemiah to leave. So things from the outside are starting to look pretty bleak. They're getting a little bit worse. And we see that Nehemiah could care less. Nehemiah is not scared at all. He continues his plan. And actually, I'm going to reread it. Verse 13 and 14 talks about his action he takes. He says, therefore I positioned men behind the lower parts of the wall at the openings, and I set the people according to their families, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles, to the leaders, and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. And he realizes that doing nothing is not the right answer. Doing nothing and leaving yourself open to an attack is not the way that he wants to play this, right? Because that could easily end in death. So he puts out a plan. The first thing he does is he looks at the wall and he identifies the weak points. He says the low points and the openings. So he finds all the weak points of the wall and he puts a guard there. And he puts them there with their weapons. All right, so later in the story, I'm not going to get to it today, but we'll see the workers, they work with a sword on their belt, and then you have a guard watching them. So he identifies those weak points. He also sets them up by families. This is incredibly important and strategic. Just go with me here. Imagine Amelia is under attack, and we've got to, on 125 out there, make a line, a line of battle. I don't know, Bethel's attacking us or something. I don't know. I don't trust you Bethelites. I know you Bethel people. So let's just say that we got to draw a line of battle, and I'm going to put the line right there because I want Walmart on my side, right? I got my Walmart. So if we line up there, and I'm next to somebody, and I'm going to fight next to him, and let's say it's somebody else from Amelia, but I really don't know him, I'm going to fight next to him, and not like I'm not going to fight, and I will do my best to protect him and protect his life like I'm protecting my own. Now, but if you take him out of the equation and put my wife next to me, it's a different ballgame. Like, I'm not saying I wouldn't fight if it wasn't my wife, but when it's your family, it's different. You will protect them to the very last ounce of breath you have in your body. As long as something can swing a sword, I will swing a sword, right? So it's different when you have a wife next to you, or if I got my kids behind me. My level of dedication just went up. And Nehemiah realizes that a force like this, when you've got family right there, this is a hard force to come against. Even if it's a larger force coming against you, you've got more to fight for. So Nehemiah strategically puts them next to their family members, and I think that was on purpose, right? And so he sets guards about, and then he addresses the crowd. He brings them together, says, here's your job, and I want to address you guys. And he says this, he says, remember the Lord, great and awesome. It's like, remember, we've got God on our side. We're not going to fail. Remember the Lord. That's how he addresses them. And whenever he's faced with adversity, and by the way, spoiler, this isn't just Nehemiah, this is a lot of the biblical greats, he uses that same formula, burden. He reemphasizes that burden. Now, that burden's not talked about, but think about it for a minute. If somebody wants to threaten your life, you're going to quickly say, is what I'm doing worth it? Then you've got to reevaluate, is that burden still a burden to you that makes sense? So he had to reevaluate that burden and say, yes, there's a physical threat against us, still worth it. Somebody wants to kill us, still worth it. And then he spends time in prayer, and then I think most importantly, he has the action, that third part, right? So he kind of goes over that formula. 2 weeks ago, we here at Bridgeway had a Vision Sunday, and so many people are excited about this. Normally we don't talk numbers or anything, but I'm just going to tell you this because this is exciting. We had the biggest January we've ever had at Bridgeway. We're up 12% over last year. It was 12% is in that, if you remember in those categories, that's like explosive growth category. And so we've had a lot of people just excited about what's going to go on. What are you guys announcing? We've had people like sending us messages. Our online viewership, right? So we go to Facebook Live for our second service. Our online viewership in January is up 133%. So people are paying attention and people are excited about it. And I'm excited about that as well. But I want to just say this. In our Vision Sunday, some people will just use those two words interchangeably, burden and vision. Personally, I think you got a burden, and your vision is how you're going to accomplish meeting that burden. But those words are fairly interchangeable. So we talked a lot about the school, because we're moving to the school, and that was a big deal. We needed to go over that and explain that to you. The school is not our burden. Our burden is the people who come through these doors. It's the people we meet out in the community. You know, I was just thinking the other day, the people that we have had come through these doors. We've had people come in here literally high because they're so addicted to drugs, they have no idea what time it is, and they just stroll in here. We've had people come in here with battling alcoholism that are still drunk when they come in here. You can smell it on them. We have people that come in here just with marriages in shambles. We've had people come in here in financial situations that are just so dire that they just don't have any hope. We've had people literally walk in here, as they're walking by from a night of partying, they have no idea where their car was. They're walking by here, and he comes in the door, and he's like, something led me here. And here's the cool thing. All those people that have come through this door, they have heard the gospel of Jesus Christ. They've heard, maybe for the first time, that somebody loves them, that Jesus loves them. Hopefully they've heard from the people here that we don't care about your past, but we do care about your future. And I hope they've gotten that message from us. How many people, just by the show of hands, how many people have an Amelia address? How many people live in Amelia? All right, so churches here. There are people just like Charity and Tom in Amelia. There are people like the Higginbothams all over this place, right? There are people just like you guys right here in Amelia. That's our burden. And it's not just Amelia. We've got folks coming from Southern Claremont, New Richmond, Felicity, we got people coming from Bethel, lots of people from Bethel. That's our burden. We've got people that come from Williamsburg, Batavia, Milford, Central Claremont, all over. That's our burden. We've got people from Hamilton County, the hills. You guys live in Hamilton County, so Anderson area, which, by the way, there's sweet little adorable Rachel right there. So she is a brand spanking new over there, nice and shiny. They live in Anderson. We've got a lot of people that live in Anderson, Eastgate, that come. People just like them in their communities. That's our burden. And we've got a lot of people that come all the way from Brown County. We've got people that come from Lynchburg. That's pretty far. I think that may be our farthest. But we've got people that come from all over. That is our burden. There are people just like you. Your burden may be a little smaller. Let's just say you live in Brown County, and maybe your burden is, people in my neighborhood, the people I work with. I want to reach them for Christ. We as a church are looking at the bigger picture. That's our burden. The school is not our burden. The school is just a way that we will be able to hopefully meet that burden, and that's just going to be it's a tool that helps us in that scenario right there. So I wanted to make sure you guys knew that. That's our burden. And church, I just said it. We know we have a burden, and hopefully you guys buy into that same burden. Our burden is to reach those hopeless people out there that don't know about the love of Christ. We want to tell them about Christ. We want to help the widows, the orphans, those in need. We want to lift them up. That's part of our vision statement, actually. And that's our burden, and I hope that you guys can align yourselves with that very burden. And as far as prayer, we pray as a church about this. We pray as a staff about this, individually about this, and I really hope that you guys are joining us any chance you can in lifting up the church and lifting up how we can best fulfill fighting that burden, right? So I hope you guys are joining us in prayer. And then we've already started to take action. If you were to take our church, throw it into the story of Nehemiah, we are at the end of chapter 2 and beginning of chapter 3. And here's what I want to challenge you with, and here's why that's so important. If you guys remember the end of chapter 2, Nehemiah says, God will prosper us and we will build the wall. Right? So that was kind of Vision Sunday for us. God has given us this. He will prosper us. Here is us. I'm not going to build a wall, but here is what we're going to do. Here's our action. Now we're at the beginning of chapter 3. If you guys remember, chapter 3 listed all those people by name that said, yes, Nehemiah, I share that burden. I'm going to work with you. I'm going to work on that wall. And I just can't help but think, if somebody years from now looks back, opens up the story of Bridgeway in chapter 3, does it say, the porters, they worked on the wall right here. Is it going to say the Webbs? Yeah, they worked on the wall right over here with their family. Are you going to be listed in chapter 3, or are you talked about in chapter 4, when it talks about the faithless Jews from the outside that didn't do anything and freaked out and tried to save their own skin? So I really want to challenge you guys this week. Think about that. Where are you? Are you in chapter 3, listed by name and willing to share the burden and help? And then set an action plan out there? Look, the action plan isn't just, I know we talked about we need some funds before we go there. The action plan isn't just we need money. We need people. We need time. We need people to serve with the kids, to serve in the nursery. We need people to play in the worship band. We need people to greet out front. We need people to help set up stuff and tear down stuff. There's a lot to be done. And from the outside, it almost looks like you're looking at the pile of rubble like, how are we going to build this wall? God is with us. Are you in chapter 3, or are you talked about in chapter 4? Let's go ahead and bow together and pray real fast.